Hello, and welcome to Addressing the Elephant in the Room, Challenges for Teaching and Learning Mathematics Online. This presentation was designed by Katelyn Wetzel and Dr. Mark Hogue at Slippery Rock University. My name is Katelyn Wetzel, and I am a virtual classroom teacher at the Pennsylvania Cyber Charter School. I have taught a variety of mathematics courses, but currently I teach Algebra 1. As a virtual classroom teacher, I teach 5 live classes a day, every single day, and it's pretty much the closest you can get to being a brick and mortar teacher, but in the cyber setting. I am also pursuing a doctorate in educational leadership and administration at Slippery Rock University, and Dr. Mark Hogue is an assistant professor at Slippery Rock University. To begin, I wanted to give you a little background on cyber schools. A lot of cyber schools have been around for just about 20 years. The Pennsylvania Cyber Charter School has been around for exactly 20 years. We are currently celebrating our 20th year in cyber learning. And a lot of the other cyber charter schools in the state of Pennsylvania have also been around for about 15 to 20 years. Now, as I was doing some research, the furthest back I could find for any type of cyber learning or online learning was back in 1997 at the Florida Virtual School. Now, their classes were all asynchronous, which is how a lot of the classes were to begin with when cyber schools were first developed. About 10 years ago or so, they started to really implement live classes. Some were just a live class once a week or maybe twice a week, and the rest asynchronous. Now we're at the point where we have virtual classes all live every day of the week. And that's the situation that I'm in. That's my position. Now, some of you have probably experienced remote learning since COVID-19 happened. And you may be wondering, is this a good fit for the student? You may even be wondering, is this a good fit as the teacher? And in terms of the students, a lot of times I see that it's not a good fit for certain students, and it's a great fit for others. And that's just something that it depends on case by case basis. Every student is different depending on their situation. Cyber learning may be the better option, and brick and mortar learning may be the better option. Now, I wanted to talk about a few major challenges that I face every single day and that you may have faced in your remote learning setting and even in the brick and mortar setting. The big one is engagement. We all struggle with engagement, and I am going to talk about that to begin with. But a few others were attendance, resources, and then reteaching/remediation. So to start with engagement, how do you engage your students in the cyber setting? You're probably thinking, how did I engage them in the remote setting? How was I supposed to know if they were engaged? And that's a great question. A lot of times with engagement, you don't know if your student is there and fully engaged in your classroom. And in the brick and mortar setting, it's a little bit different because you can see them face to face. You may use things like smart boards or whiteboards or group activities to try and get the students engaged. And I do a little bit of that in the cyber setting. We have breakout rooms where we can group students together and put them into breakout rooms so they can work in groups. I use things like quizzes and Kahoot and Desmos. And I try to implement these things into my class. That way I get my students engaged and try to keep them engaged. But the biggest thing is, how do you actually know they're there? Right now, we don't use webcams. Only I use a webcam as the teacher, so the students don't have webcams. And that causes a problem because sometimes they don't respond. How am I supposed to know if they're actually engaged? And a lot of times I have them use things like green checks or smiley faces. They have a list of emojis and feedback symbols that they can use. Sometimes that shows that they're engaged. Maybe they send a private chat and that means engagement, or they use the microphone, or they write on the board. So there's a lot of different options, but are they fully engaged? Were they just engaged at that point, or are they fully engaged the entire class? And that's a challenge that all of us face, no matter what setting that we're in. Something else that I wanted to bring up was, how do I get my parents engaged? How do I get them involved? And that can be tough. Some parents are disengaged from school altogether. They may be working or not at home, and that can be an issue. Sometimes it's hard to get a hold of the parents. I use things like newsletters and weekly emails to send home. That way, the parents know what we're doing in class. They're aware of what their students are doing. And hopefully, that draws some engagement from them. There are times where I get emails back asking questions about their student. Are they doing well? Do they need help? Do they need to go to tutoring? And that's a great option to get the parents involved. Attendance is the second one. What do we do if a student doesn't show up to class for a few days? What about a week or a month? Now, you may not have fully experienced this, but this is one thing that I experience all the time. Sometimes even in the remote setting, you may see them gone for a couple days. Maybe they're sick, they had to be, admitted to the hospital, or they are a student athlete and they have to be pulled away and they have to go do different things, training, things like that. A specific example for a student athlete that I had previously was a cyclist who was on the junior national cycling team. He was traveling all over the United States, all during the school year in training, and he still was able to attend my live class every day because he was able to take that with him no matter where he went. Some other issues may be issues at home. Maybe they can't get to school. Maybe they missed the bus and there is nobody there to take them to school. Or there's bullying issues and they're afraid to come to school, and that can be a major concern. Now, this all kind of ties back to, is this the right setting? In my situation, in the cyber setting, sometimes students just aren't able to get to their computer. Maybe their parents aren't home and they don't have somebody there to keep them accountable, and that's why they miss class. Or their parents don't know that they're missing class. So maybe that's not the right setting for certain students. Maybe it is the right setting, but there's still issues going on at home. And that's something that we have to take into consideration as we're thinking about what these students are going through, just as what we are going through during this time. Third thing was resources. So what needs to be done when your students don't have textbooks? What if they didn't have their textbooks? What if they didn't bring it home with them? What if they were doing homework, but they forgot it at school? That's a situation that you might see in the brick and mortar setting. Or maybe you don't have a textbook at all. I know a lot of companies are phasing out textbooks. That's what we're seeing in the cyber setting. I have not used a textbook in Algebra 1. We have some other resources, a Keystone Finish Line book to help alongside the Keystone exams, and we have another resource, but overall, no physical textbook. So sometimes we have to figure out, well, how am I going to provide them with more notes? How am I going to provide them with extra practice? Where's that coming from? And a lot of it comes specifically from us creating it. And that's something that you have probably experienced as well, creating specific problems. Now, a challenge that I specifically face in the resources department is, does my student have a calculator? And sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're in a different setting. They had to go, to the local coffee shop to do class because their internet went out. Or they are, at a friend's house or at grandma's house and they didn't bring their calculator. So a resource that I use is the Desmos Scientific Calculator. I always provide that to my students who don't have their calculator because it has the same exact functions that our basic calculator has. Now, that's something that you may not experience in the brick and mortar setting because you probably have a class set of calculators. But it's always something to think about and to know that there are other resources out there that we can provide to our students. My final challenge was reteaching and remediation. How do you know they're taking notes? How do you know that they're using that study guide that I gave them, or that Algebra 1 formula sheet that they're allowed to use on the Keystone exam? How do I know that it's there and in front of them? I don't. but I can provide it to them. One thing that is very important in the cyber setting is access to tutoring and access to your teacher. As I was doing research, there were a lot of different articles that said students had trouble relying on their teacher getting back to them because sometimes they didn't get back to them for a day or two. That's something that I always try to stay on top of, responding to my students, giving them options for tutoring, giving them, another resource to contact me. And one of those things is the Remind app. I use the Remind app every single year. I can get it right on my phone. So can the students. They can also go directly to remind.com. But that's a great resource for them to contact me outside of school hours. I don't look at my school email outside of school hours, but I do look at the Remind app. And that's a great way for students to ask quick questions, get an answer to that, and be able to continue on with their homework. Now, I want to take some time to talk about how I gained positive traction and how you can gain positive traction as well. First thing is holding students and parents accountable. You want to make sure that they are working alongside each other, that they know that you're there to help their student. And one thing specifically that I try to do is incorporate those newsletters, emails, Remind app reminders. And the newsletters and emails, as I mentioned earlier, the parents respond back to, and a lot of times the students will respond back to and say, hey, Miss Wetzel, I did this. I completed it. I think you graded it already. And that's fantastic, that they're paying attention and that they're holding themselves accountable. And that's something that's very, very important. And honestly, it doesn't work for all students, but anything I can do to try to help a couple of them is important to me. I always like to keep the students active as well, whether that's putting up a green check or a smiley face, giving me a little, hey, I'm here in the chat, raising their hand, or just getting them up and moving. Sometimes I say, hey guys, let's stop, take a deep breath in the middle of class. And I have them get up and walk around. Now, of course, I don't know if they're getting up and walking around, but they can see me on my webcam walking around. So hopefully some of them do take advantage of that just to get them back up and moving, get the blood flowing. And it's important to do that, especially when they're sitting there for 50 minutes staring at a screen. Another thing is providing those extra resources. Again, I said that I have extra notes and things that I've created, but don't feel the need to reinvent the wheel. Go out and look for other resources. Some specifics that I have are quizzes, Kahoot, Desmos. With quizzes and Kahoot, you can play games with the students, and quizzes actually provides practice links. And you don't have to create those questions. They're all in there. You can search certain topics and it'll bring it up for you. So those are great ways to provide extra resources to the students without it taking too much time away from what you are doing. Another thing was Desmos. If you go to teacher.desmos.com, there are a bunch of different Desmos activities. And a lot of times these take up an entire class period, or you can assign them for homework or for an activity. And they're fun and they get the students engaged and they get them learning when they don't actually know they're learning, which is very, very cool. So I suggest looking at those as well. My last thing is growth mindset, which is very near and dear to my heart. I'm currently doing a lot of outside research and figuring out how students learn with a certain mindset and how to engage those students with this growth mindset. I'm also looking at how to engage parents with this growth mindset. And it's very, very important to try to introduce this to your students. And the first thing that I found in terms of growth mindset was Joe Bowler. Joe Bowler was the first one who talks about mathematical mindsets and how it relates in the math classroom. And that was awesome to me because a lot of times we don't get cool stuff in the math classroom. But this was one cool thing that we started to implement, a couple of colleagues and myself at my current school, and it's been working. Another book that I read was The Mindset Book by Carol Dweck. I have it right here. It's a fantastic book, not just for students and teaching, but just for life in general. Honestly, that book changed my mindset. I teetered between that fixed and growth mindset, and that helped me figure out where I was and what my mindset was. And I used some of that information in my classroom as well. So I definitely suggest looking into that, even taking a quick look at the different books that I mentioned, or searching it online. Carol Dweck has done many TED Talks along with Joe Bowler on growth mindset and how it's important and how you can incorporate it in your classroom. Now, I will say sometimes it's hard with what Joe Bowler provides because it's not a cyber setting type of situation. And that's something that's been a challenge specifically for me because it takes a little bit to figure out how it's going to work in the cyber setting. But overall, wonderful resources, and it's really, really worked. So just to conclude a little bit, a couple things that I suggest trying out if you're having a little bit of trouble with these specific challenges, not only in the remote setting, but also in the brick and mortar setting. Try to incorporate classroom norms. This was super important to me at the beginning of the year, and my students loved this. They created their own classroom norms for each of my 5 classes, and we utilize these throughout the year. They talk about the fact that they created them, and they're so excited about that. And they kind of had, a way to give information in the class and provide a way to run the class, not just the way the teacher wanted, but the way they wanted. And they thought that that was really, really cool. Again, implement that growth mindset. Even if it's just one short video, I've seen a lot and shown a lot of short 5 to 10 minute videos. Just search growth mindset on YouTube. A ton of information comes up, and a lot of it is really, really great. Again, send out those monthly newsletters and weekly emails. Even if you don't think anybody's reading them, there are people that read them. Trust me, I get responses back, and it makes me feel really, really good to know that somebody is taking the time to know what their students are looking at. And when the students respond back, that's great as well, because you can see that they are paying attention to those things you're sending out as well. And then finally, utilize some of those websites I mentioned already, Kahoot, Quizzes, Desmos. With Quizzes and Desmos, that's something that you can give as extra practice material, extra resources. Kahoot is more of a fun in-class game to help review or to help go over specific concepts. But Quizzes and Desmos provide wonderful opportunities to give extra resources without you having to do the work. All the work is already done. Again, don't reinvent the wheel. Take what you can get from the resources that are provided to you. So I hope that this helped, especially with some of the challenges we may face, not only in the cyber setting, but also in the brick and mortar setting. So if you have any questions or would like some more information or would like to discuss anything, feel free to reach out to both me or Dr. Hogue. Both of our emails are provided here. I hope that you enjoyed my talk, and I hope that this benefited for you. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.